The Florida coast shimmered beneath the pale dawn light as thousands gathered along the shoreline, their eyes fixed on the distant horizon. The humid air buzzed with anticipation, and somewhere beyond the dunes, the faint hum of turbines could already be heard. Today wasn't just another launch day, it was the 37th mission of SpaceX's Starlink program this year, and it carried more than satellites. It carried the promise of connection for millions around the globe. At Launch Complex 40, Cape Canaveral, the Falcon 9 rocket stood poised, sleek and silver against the morning sky. Its surface glistened with dew, and the emblazoned SpaceX logo reflected the glow of floodlights that bathed the site in white brilliance. Engineers moved like shadows around the base, performing their final checks as the countdown ticked ever closer to zero. Inside the Launch Control Center, a team of specialists sat before walls of screens. Flight Director Karen Lomas adjusted her headset and scanned the telemetry data streaming across her monitor. "Falcon 9 is green across all systems," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the excitement that danced in her chest. On another screen, the live feed from the drone ship A Shortfall of Gravitas flickered to life. It was waiting patiently in the Atlantic Ocean, positioned precisely for the rocket's return. The sea below it rippled gently, the faintest whisper of wind brushing across the metallic deck. The first stage's journey wasn't just to the edge of space, it was a round trip. At T-10 minutes, the chill of liquid oxygen venting from the rocket began to create ghostly plumes around its frame. The crowd watching from afar could see the vapor twisting like smoke from a dragon's nostrils. Cameras clicked, children pointed, and reporters murmured into microphones, narrating history as it unfolded. Stage 1 and Stage 2 pressing for flight, came the calm voice from the control center. The countdown continued. The moment had arrived. Falcon 9, go for launch. A collective breath seemed to hold the world still. At T-0, engines roared to life with an earth-shaking thunder. The base of the rocket burst into a cascade of orange and white flame, and Falcon 9 lifted gracefully from the pad. The ground trembled, waves rippled across the coast, and spectators shielded their eyes from the blinding light. A trail of fire carved through the sky as the rocket climbed higher and higher, the engine's growl fading into a low rumble that echoed through every chest on the beach. Karen leaned closer to her screen. Stage separation confirmed. The first stage detached and began its controlled descent, flipping in midair to orient itself for re-entry. Meanwhile, the second stage ignited again, pushing its precious payload of Starlink satellites toward orbit. The live feed showed the Earth's curvature emerging behind it, bathed in a pale blue halo of atmosphere. Back on Earth, the returning booster pierced through the sky like a falling comet, its grid fins deploying to stabilize its path. Viewers around the world held their breath. The landing sequence was the most dramatic part of every SpaceX launch, an engineering ballet of precision, physics, and courage. Stage 1 entry burn, Karen called out. The booster's engines flared to life again, slowing its descent as it neared the waiting drone ship. Salt spray and mist clouded the camera, but then, like a ghost emerging from fog, the Falcon's silhouette appeared, descending slowly, perfectly centered. And then came the voice everyone waited for. Stage 1 landing confirmed. Applause erupted inside Mission Control. Karen smiled, finally letting out the breath she'd been holding. On the drone ship, the booster stood tall, its landing legs deployed. Steam curling around its base. The precision was mesmerizing, 100 tons of steel and fire returning from the edge of space to touch down softly on a moving ship. In orbit, the second stage released the Starlink payload. Dozens of satellites drifted away, glittering like stars against the blackness. They would soon fan out across the planet, forming another link in the growing network that promised to bring high-speed internet to even the remotest corners of the Earth, from Arctic research stations to small desert villages. Down at the press area, a SpaceX spokesperson stepped forward. Starlink Group 10 to 37 has successfully deployed into orbit. Recovery of the first stage is complete. This marks Falcon 9's 182nd successful landing. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes, and the excitement surged through the crowd again. But the real story was bigger than just numbers. Inside the crowd stood a young engineer named Luis Moreno, who had joined SpaceX only a year ago. For him, this wasn't just a job, it was a dream realized. His eyes followed the faint vapor trail that lingered in the sky, and he thought of the long nights spent testing circuitry, debugging systems, and poring over launch simulations. He had always imagined being part of something that reached beyond the limits of gravity, something that connected people, not just physically, but symbolically. Nearby, a little girl tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, where did the rocket go?" she asked, eyes wide with wonder. "To space," he said softly, smiling. "It's helping people talk to each other, people really far away." The child's gaze drifted upward again. "Can they see us from up there?" "Maybe," he chuckled. "Maybe they can." Hours later, as the control center began to empty and the technicians powered down their stations, Karen lingered behind. She stared at the screen displaying the orbits of the newly deployed satellites. Tiny white dots moving in harmony, tracing invisible paths around Earth. Every dot represented a promise, a message sent, a family reconnected, a student in a remote region finally able to study online. Outside, the Atlantic breeze swept across the darkened launch pad. The Falcon's smoke had long since faded, and silence returned to Cape Canaveral. Yet the hum of what had happened lingered in the air, echoing through the ground, through the clouds, through the stars themselves. In the days that followed, news of the successful mission spread worldwide. Analysts discussed how Starlink's growing network would transform communications and data transfer. Farmers in Africa and fishermen in the Pacific began using Starlink connections to access weather data and markets in real time. Remote hospitals used it to send scans and receive consultations from specialists thousands of miles away. But for the team at SpaceX, it was already time to prepare for the next launch. In the vast hangar where Falcon 9 boosters were inspected and refurbished, the recently landed stage from this mission stood proudly. Scorch marks streaked its sides, and its metallic skin bore the scars of re-entry. Yet it was still ready, still capable of flying again. A technician brushed a hand over its side. "You've got another journey left in you," he murmured. Every bolt, every weld, every circuit carried the story of human ingenuity, of people daring to look upward and not stop. At the next press conference, Elon Musk appeared on screen, his voice calm but energized. "Starlink's mission is to connect the unconnected," he said. "Each launch brings us closer to a future where access to information isn't a privilege, it's a right. And every successful landing is a step toward making spaceflight as routine as air travel." The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed again. The world listened. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, streaks of light appeared in the night sky. The newly deployed Starlink satellites, still clustered in their train formation, drifted across the heavens in silent grace. People from Florida to Brazil to Spain looked up and gasped, some snapping photos, others just watching in awe. For a few moments, the world seemed united under a single sky, connected by strings of light launched by human hands. Luis stood on the coast again, watching the streaks fade into the darkness. He thought of the little girl's question, "Can they see us from up there?" and smiled. Maybe, he thought, maybe they can. He turned to head back toward the facility, where another Falcon waited in the hangar, engines gleaming, systems humming quietly in anticipation of its turn. Space never stopped calling, and SpaceX never stopped answering. In the grand scheme of exploration, this was just another day, another flight, another success. But in the hearts of those who witnessed it, the moment was eternal. Because every launch carried something more powerful than satellites or science, it carried hope. And so, as the stars above twinkled faintly against the black velvet of space, the echoes of that morning's thunder still resonated in the wind. Somewhere out there, a network of human-made stars circled the planet, lighting up the sky and the future, one launch at a time. SpaceX had done it again. Falcon 9 had soared, Starlink had expanded, and the dream of a connected world had moved one step closer to reality. And when the next rocket stood ready, gleaming under the floodlights, the world would once again gather to watch humanity touch the stars.